so now let's start talking about the American Revolution. Now, there were a lot of causes of the American Revolution, and I'm about to go through all of them right now. In short, the revolution had to occur because England kept adding new laws that regulated the colonists, which of course the colonists hated. Now, since the cost of the French and Indian War was so high, Britain decided to tax the colonists so they could help pay for the cost of the war, and the colonists didn't like this because they didn't think they deserved to be taxed. England's strong belief in mercantilism also led to the revolution. Mercantilists basically believed that a state's power was based on its ability to minimize importation and maximize exportation. So mercantilists also wanted to increase specie, and specie is just another word for gold or silver coin. So by putting their mercantilist policies into action, Britain passed the Navigation Act, which placed high duties or tariffs. Also, a side note, in case you don't know, duties and tariffs are just synonyms for taxes. So basically, the Navigation Acts placed high taxes on colonies if they traded with anyone outside the British Empire. So in essence, mercantilism allowed Britain to basically monopolize trade with the colonies and basically made it illegal for the colonies to trade with anyone else, like France or Spain or any other competitor Britain might be threatened by. Also, once George Grenville, once he was appointed the new prime minister, he thought Britain needed to exercise more power over the colonists. So Grenville passed the Sugar Act, which placed a duty on foreign goods that contained sugar. Grenville also passed the Stamp Act, which made it a law for all legal documents, newspapers, pamphlets, etc. They all had to have a stamp. And the stamps were only sold at Grenville's treasury for an extremely high price, and the colonists were pretty pissed because, because obviously, the new high expense, which they hated, but also because this new tax only profited the British Crown, and it wasn't like 100% of the profits went to the British Crown, none of it went to the colonists. So that made them really upset. Also, the Stamp Act and the Sugar Act led to great uproar among the colonists, and it led to that cry that we all know about: no taxation without representation. So the colonists basically felt like they shouldn't be taxed because they weren't represented in the British Parliament. And Britain obviously denounced that and rebutted, saying everyone's virtually represented in their government, in their parliament. So basically, virtual representation was Britain's way of saying their parliament represents everyone who lives in British territories, not just those living in Britain. Now, virtual representation's sole purpose was to shoot down that no taxation without representation, that whole motto that was, the heart of the Revolutionary War. The Sons of Liberty was established, and it was basically a radical group that was created by colonists as a response to the Stamp and Sugar Acts imposed by Britain. The Sons of Liberty terrorized British officials responsible for implementing the acts by the British Crown. They were successful in repealing the acts imposed by Grenville. Although they were successful repealing the the Sugar and Stamp Act, Britain definitely made sure to, add in another act called the Declaratory Act, which basically stated that Britain had the power to tax the colonies in the future in any way it sought appropriate. So, the Declaratory Act wasn't really an act of taxes or anything. It was just kind of like a declaration that, they could tax if they wanted to. It was completely useless. I don't see the point of that anyways. Alright, so after a few years of silence with the Declaratory Act, a new prime minister came by the name of Charles Townshend, and Townshend wanted to raise taxes again, and he passed the Tea Act, which removed duties on tea exported to the colonies by England's East India Company. This act is significant because it actually lowered the cost of England's East India Company's tea, which ended up flooding the markets in the colonies and undercutting the price of tea sold by colonial merchants. And the Tea Act basically resulted in the Boston Tea Party, where the colonists dressed up as Indians and dumped the East India tea into the Boston Harbor as protest. Which makes sense because the colonists were really upset that, the East India Company could do something like that, try to undermine their intelligence by undercutting all the tea prices just by making their price so low. But the Boston Tea Party was definitely important, and you should remember that. But the colonists' mischievous behavior at the Tea Party was not well received by Britain. Upon hearing of the Boston Tea Party, the Intolerable Acts of 1774 were passed, and the Intolerable Acts closed Boston Harbor until the tea spilled during the Boston Tea Party was paid for. It revoked Massachusetts' charter. It replaced the Commonwealth's elected officials. It expanded Quebec's territory, and it forced civilians to house and quarter the British soldiers in their homes in the colonies. So, the Intolerable Acts were pretty intolerable, like the name says, and this was really the straw that broke the camel's back, and this was, this basically led to the war. And all these new taxes were imposed by Townshend. They all gathered up and resulted in the Boston Massacre, where British soldiers got into an argument while trying to control a crowd of protesters. The British soldiers ended up firing into the crowd of protesters, and they killed 5 civilians, which sucks, but that's what they had to do because the crowd was getting too rowdy. So those are the causes of the American Revolution. And next, in my next video, I'm going to talk about the road to independence and the country in its very infancy. All right.